A dog keeps crying after its owner passes away. Day after day, his howls cut through the silence. But when a vet reaches for the collar to calm him, she suddenly bursts into tears. What secret could be hidden on a simple brass tag? What message was left behind? And who was it really meant for? This isn't just a story about grief. It's about a dying man's last plan, a dog carrying a hidden truth, and a woman who discovers her entire life is not what she thought. The deeper she follows the trail, the more dangerous it becomes, because someone else will do anything to keep that truth buried. A loyal animal, a dead man's final secret, a fight for survival that could change everything. What was written on that collar? And why was it meant for her? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The bitter Wyoming winter wind howled across the empty plains, matching the mournful cries that echoed from the old Rook farmhouse. Snow had been falling steadily since dawn, blanketing the ranch in white silence, except for those heart-wrenching howls that seemed to pierce right through the frozen air. Dr. Tamsin McKay pulled her weathered truck onto the gravel driveway, her veterinary kit ready beside her. The emergency call had come just as she'd finished her morning rounds at the clinic. Bernard Rook, the elderly rancher who'd lived alone on this spread for decades, had been found dead in his home. His cattle dog wouldn't let anyone near the body. Through her windshield, Tamsin could see several vehicles already parked in the yard: the sheriff's cruiser, the county coroner's van, and a couple of pickup trucks belonging to neighbors. The dog's cries grew louder as she approached, making her heart ache. In her 15 years as a rural vet, she'd seen many animals grieve, but something about this one's voice carried a deeper pain. Sheriff Martinez met her at the front porch, his breath visible in the freezing air. "Thanks for coming out, Doc. That dog's been like this since the Hendersons found Mr. Rook this morning. Won't let anyone close, not even people he knows. Thought maybe you could help calm him down so we can, do what needs doing." Tamsin nodded, adjusting her heavy coat. "How long has Mr. Rook been?" "Best guess is sometime yesterday. Natural causes, looks like. He was 87, lived out here alone except for that dog." The sheriff shook his head. "Pilot's his name. Usually the sweetest cattle dog you'd ever meet, but now..." Another howl split the air, and Tamsin grabbed her kit. "Let me see him." Inside, the farmhouse was neat but sparse, with worn furniture and faded photographs on the walls. The temperature wasn't much warmer than outside. The heating must have failed after Bernard passed. In the living room, Pilot stood guard next to an old leather armchair where Bernard's body still sat, as if he'd simply fallen asleep while reading. The blue merle cattle dog's coat was flecked with gray around his muzzle, speaking to years of faithful service. His amber eyes locked onto Tamsin as she entered, but instead of growling, he fell silent for the first time since she'd arrived. His scarred ear twitched, and his tail gave the slightest wag. "Hey there, sweet boy," Tamsin said softly, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. "I know you're hurting. I'm here to help." To everyone's surprise, Pilot stepped away from Bernard's body. He approached Tamsin cautiously, his head lowered but his eyes never leaving her face. There was something in that gaze, intelligence, recognition almost, that made her pause. "Well, I'll be," Sheriff Martinez whispered from the doorway. "That's the first time he's moved from that spot all morning." Tamsin knelt slowly, holding out her hand for Pilot to sniff. The dog pressed his nose against her palm, then pushed his head under her fingers, seeking comfort. His entire body trembled with grief, but he allowed her to stroke his fur. "Good boy," she murmured. "Such a good, brave boy." As she ran her hand along his neck to check his collar, standard procedure to verify ownership and vaccination status, her fingers found the brass identification tag. She turned it over to read the information, expecting to see Bernard Rook's details. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as she read the engraving. Dr. Tamsin McKay, 2876, Creek Road, Medicine Bow, Y Box, Duffer 247, First National Bank. Tamsin's hands began to shake. She read the tag again, certain she must be seeing things. But no, there was her name, her address, even her bank, clear as day on this grieving dog's collar. A dog she'd never met, owned by a man she'd never known. "Everything all right, Doc?" Sheriff Martinez called from the doorway. She couldn't find her voice for a moment. Pilot pressed closer against her legs, as if sensing her distress. Finally, she managed to speak. "Sheriff, could you come look at this?" Martinez crossed the room carefully, mindful of Pilot, but the dog barely acknowledged him now. He was focused entirely on Tamsin, those intelligent eyes watching her every move. The sheriff bent down to examine the collar tag, and his eyebrows shot up. "Well, that's unexpected," he said slowly. "You knew Mr. Rook?" "Never met him," Tamsin replied, her mind racing. "Never treated Pilot before either. I don't understand." She looked around the room with new eyes, taking in the sparse furnishings, the family photos she couldn't quite make out from this angle. Something deeper was at work here, something Bernard Rook had set in motion before his death. Why else would her information be on this dog's collar? Pilot whined softly and nudged her hand with his nose. The tag glinted in the weak winter light streaming through the windows, that bank box number seeming to jump out at her. Box 247. Was there something waiting for her there? Some explanation for this impossible situation? The coroner cleared his throat from the hallway. "Sheriff, we need to move the body soon." Tamsin reached for her kit, but Pilot showed no signs of aggression now. He stayed pressed against her legs, as if he'd found his new purpose. When the coroner's team entered the room, the dog watched calmly, only whimpering softly as they lifted Bernard's body from the chair. "I'll need to sedate him after all," Tamsin said, more to herself than the others. "He'll need somewhere to go while arrangements are made." The words were out of her mouth before she'd fully formed the thought, but they felt right. "I can take him to my clinic, keep him under observation." Sheriff Martinez nodded. "Probably for the best. Mr. Rook doesn't have any family nearby that I know of. We'll need to track down next of kin." But something told Tamsin that Bernard Rook had already chosen where he wanted Pilot to go. Her name on that collar wasn't a coincidence. As she prepared a mild sedative, her hands steady despite her racing thoughts, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something larger. The injection was quick and gentle. Pilot didn't resist, accepting it with the same trust he'd shown her from the moment she arrived. As the sedative took effect, he leaned heavily against her, and she stroked his fur until his breathing evened out. "I'll help you get him to your truck," Martinez offered, but when he stepped forward, Pilot roused himself enough to stand shakily and follow Tamsin on his own. Through the snow they went, the dog's paws leaving tracks alongside her boots. She opened the passenger door of her truck and helped him inside, where he settled on the seat as if he'd ridden there 100 times before. As Tamsin closed the door, she looked back at the farmhouse. The coroner's team was bringing out Bernard's body, wrapped now and loaded carefully onto a stretcher. Pilot watched through the window but didn't howl. Instead, he pressed his nose against the glass and released a soft, shuddering sigh. The brass tag caught the winter light again as Pilot shifted, and Tamsin felt the weight of it like a physical thing. Somewhere in town, in a bank box with her name on it, answers were waiting. But for now, she had a grieving dog to care for, a dog who, for reasons she couldn't yet understand, had been entrusted to her by a man she'd never met. The truck's engine turned over with a growl, and Tamsin began the slow drive back to town through the falling snow. In the seat beside her, Pilot's eyes grew heavy with sedation, but his tail thumped weakly against the leather when she reached over to pat his head. "We'll figure this out," she promised him softly. "Whatever Bernard wanted me to know, whatever he was trying to tell me, we'll figure it out together." The old farmhouse disappeared in her rearview mirror, swallowed by the swirling snow. Ahead lay Medicine Bow, her clinic, and a mystery wrapped in grief and trust. Pilot's breathing deepened as he drifted off, finally finding some peace in sleep. But Tamsin's mind was wide awake, turning over and over that impossible tag, that bank box number, and the question that wouldn't let her go. What did Bernard Rook know about her, and why had he chosen her, of all people, to care for his most faithful companion? The drive back to Tamsin's clinic was quiet, except for Pilot's deep, sedated breathing. Snow fell steadily, coating Medicine Bow in a thick white blanket that muffled all sound. As she pulled into the parking lot behind her small veterinary practice, Tamsin couldn't shake the feeling that her world had shifted in some fundamental way. The clinic was closed for the day, but the familiar sight of its weathered sign, McKay Veterinary Services, gave her a measure of comfort. She helped the groggy Pilot down from the truck, supporting his weight as they made their way to the back entrance. The dog moved slowly but surely, as if he knew exactly where they were going. Inside, Tamsin flicked on the lights, illuminating the cozy waiting room with its worn chairs and faded educational posters about heartworm prevention and proper pet nutrition. She led Pilot past the examination room to her private office in the back, where she kept a large dog bed for occasional overnight patients. "Here you go, boy," she murmured, helping him settle onto the plush bed. Pilot circled once before lying down, his eyes heavy but still tracking her movements. The brass tag on his collar caught the fluorescent light, reminding her again of its impossible message. Tamsin sat at her desk, reaching for her phone to call the bank, when the front door chimed. She hadn't locked it behind them. Before she could stand, heavy footsteps thundered through the waiting room. "Where is it? Where's that damn dog?" A man burst into her office, his face flushed red with anger. He was tall and heavy-set, wearing an expensive suit that seemed out of place in the modest clinic. His dark hair was slicked back, and his eyes held none of the grief you'd expect from someone who'd just lost a relative. Pilot lifted his head and growled low in his throat, the sound surprisingly menacing even through his sedation. "I'm Dr. McKay," Tamsin said, rising slowly. "And you are?" "Clive Rook," he spat. "Bernard's nephew and rightful heir. That dog belongs to me now, along with everything else my uncle left behind." His gaze fixed on Pilot's collar. "Including that collar. Hand it over." Tamsin moved to stand between Clive and the dog. "I'm afraid I can't do that. The collar clearly has my name on it, Mr. Rook. Whatever your uncle's reasons, he apparently wanted Pilot to come to me." Clive's face darkened. That old fool was losing his mind at the end. He didn't know what he was doing. That dog is dangerous. It attacked 3 people this morning. It needs to be put down immediately, and I'm ordering you to do it." "That's not true," Tamsin said firmly. "I was there this morning. Pilot was distressed over Bernard's death, yes, but he didn't attack anyone. He's been nothing but gentle with me." "You don't know anything about this situation," Clive snarled, taking a step forward. "That dog is ranch property, and the ranch is mine now. Everything on it belongs to me." Pilot struggled to his feet, hackles rising despite his sedation. His amber eyes were fixed on Clive, and though his legs were unsteady, his protective stance was clear. "Mr. Rook," Tamsin said, keeping her voice level, "I understand you're upset, but I won't be putting this dog down. There's no medical or behavioral reason to do so, And until we sort out the legal situation regarding his ownership, he'll be staying here under my care." Clive's hands clenched into fists. "You have no idea what kind of fight you're walking into, Dr. McKay. That collar belongs to me, and so does that mutt. One way or another, I'll make sure of it." "Are you threatening me, Mr. Rook?" Tamsin asked quietly. "I'm promising you," he replied, his voice cold. "You're nothing but a small-town vet who doesn't know her place. My uncle's property is mine now, all of it. That includes any messages or instructions he might have left behind." His eyes flickered to the collar again. Whatever game the old man was playing, it's over now. Pilot's growl deepened, and Clive took a step back despite himself. "I think you should leave," Tamsin said. "Any legal claims you have can be handled through proper channels, but Pilot stays here for now." "This isn't over," Clive said, jabbing a finger in her direction. "Not by a long shot. That dog is dangerous, and I'll prove it. I'll have the sheriff here with a destruction order before you know it." "Good luck with that," Tamsin replied. "Sheriff Martinez saw Pilot's behavior himself this morning. He knows the truth." Clive's face twisted with rage. "You think you're so clever, don't you? But you have no idea what's really going on here. That dog knows things that could cause a lot of trouble. My uncle wasn't thinking straight when he put your name on that collar." "Maybe he was thinking more clearly than you realize," Tamsin said, her hand dropping to rest on Pilot's head. The dog leaned against her leg, steady despite his sedation. "Have it your way," Clive snapped. "But remember, I warned you. Whatever happens next is on your own head." He turned and stormed out, his footsteps echoing through the clinic. The front door slammed so hard it rattled the windows. Tamsin waited until she heard his car start up and drive away before letting out a shaky breath. Pilot whined softly and pressed closer to her. "It's okay, boy," she murmured, scratching behind his ears. "We're okay." But her hand trembled slightly as she touched the collar again, tracing the engraved numbers of the bank box. What had Bernard Rook been trying to tell her? And what did Pilot know that had his nephew so desperate to silence him? The snow continued to fall outside her window, and somewhere in that gathering darkness, she knew Clive Rook was plotting his next move. But looking down at Pilot's trusting face, she knew she'd made the right choice. Whatever fight was coming, whatever secrets lay waiting in that bank box, she would see it through. The dog sighed and settled back onto his bed, his eyes drifting closed as the sedative pulled him back toward sleep. Tamsin sat down at her desk, her mind racing. She needed to call the bank, needed to understand what Bernard had left for her to find. But first, she had to make sure Pilot would be safe. Something told her this was just the first skirmish in what would become a much larger battle. She picked up her phone and dialed Sheriff Martinez's number. Whatever Clive Rook was planning, she wanted a record of his threats. As she waited for the sheriff to answer, she watched Pilot sleep, his chest rising and falling steadily. Bernard had trusted her with his beloved dog's safety, trusted her enough to engrave her name on that collar months or even years before his death. She wouldn't let either of them down. The morning after Clive's threats, Tamsin arrived early at her clinic to check on Pilot. The sedatives had worn off, and he greeted her with newfound energy, his tail wagging as she approached his kennel. But there was something different about his behavior, a restlessness she hadn't noticed before. "What's wrong, boy?" she asked, opening the kennel door. Pilot darted out, then stopped at the clinic's front door, looking back at her expectantly. He whined, pawing at the door. "You need to go out?" Tamsin reached for his leash, but Pilot sidestepped, clearly agitated. He kept glancing between her and the door, his whole body tense with urgency. Okay, let me grab my coat." The winter morning was bitter cold, frost coating every surface. Pilot took off the moment she opened the door, then stopped several yards away, waiting for her to follow. This wasn't a normal need-to-go-out behavior. He was trying to show her something. "Lead the way," she said softly. Pilot trotted ahead, constantly checking to make sure she was following. They headed away from town, toward the Rook Ranch. Tamsin's stomach tightened. She probably shouldn't be here without permission, but something in Pilot's determination told her this was important. They skirted the main house, where yellow police tape still fluttered in the wind. Pilot led her to a large barn set away from the other buildings. The door was padlocked, but Pilot scratched at a loose board near the bottom. "Here?" Tamsin asked. Pilot barked once, decisive. She examined the board and found it was actually a cleverly disguised pet door, weathered to match the barn's exterior. Pilot squeezed through without hesitation. After a moment's deliberation, Tamsin tested the board herself. It swung easily on hidden hinges, just large enough for her to crawl through. Inside, the barn was dim but surprisingly organized. As her eyes adjusted, she saw shelves lined with labeled boxes and filing cabinets. A large table dominated the center, covered in maps and papers held down by rocks and various pieces of equipment. "What is all this?" she muttered. Pilot went straight to one of the filing cabinets, putting his paw on the bottom drawer. When Tamsin opened it, she found dozens of water testing kits, some used and carefully documented, others still sealed in their packages. "The water source tests show concerning levels of industrial contaminants," she read from one report, dated just 2 months ago. "Origin appears to be from the northwest quadrant, corresponding with Site C on the survey map." She moved to the table, where topographical maps of the ranch and surrounding areas were marked with colored pins and flags. Notes in Bernard's precise handwriting covered the margins. "Third test confirms pattern. Must document thoroughly before confronting them. Legal needs ironclad proof." A sound outside made her freeze. Footsteps crunched in the snow, approaching the barn. "Dr. McKay?" a familiar voice called softly. "You in there?" She relaxed slightly, recognizing Deputy Cole Merritt's voice. Pilot's calm demeanor confirmed it was safe. "In here," she called back. "There's a hidden entrance on the south side." Moments later, the deputy crawled through the pet door, brushing snow from his uniform as he straightened up. "Figured I'd find you out here eventually. Pilot's not the type to stay cooped up in a clinic." "Deputy Merritt," she began. "Cole," he corrected gently. "We've known each other long enough." "Cole," she amended. "I know I probably shouldn't be here, but Pilot practically insisted. And what I've found—" She gestured to the documents spread across the table. He moved closer, examining the maps and testing kits. "Bernard was building a case," he said quietly. "Had been for months. He came to me with concerns about the water quality but couldn't prove anything yet." "What kind of concerns?" Cole's face was grim. "Clive's been meeting with investors, a water bottling company that wants to tap the aquifer under this land. But there's also rumors about illegal dumping in the area. Bernard suspected the two might be connected." "Connected how?" "Think about it. If someone wanted to buy this land cheap, what better way than to prove it's worthless for water bottling? Contaminate the source, wait for the ranch to fail, then swoop in and clean it up once you own it." Tamsin felt sick. "And Clive's involved in this?" "Bernard thought so, but couldn't prove it. That's what all this is, him gathering evidence. These flags mark testing sites." Cole picked up one of the surveys. He was methodical, tracking the spread of contamination over time, building a case that would stand up in court. "Is that why—" Tamsin's hand went to her pocket, where she kept Pilot's collar. "Is that why he put my name on the collar? Because he knew something might happen to him?" Cole nodded slowly. Bernard wasn't just a paranoid old man. He knew he was dealing with dangerous people. Must have figured you, an outsider with veterinary credentials and a reputation for honesty, would be the perfect person to find this evidence if anything happened to him. But why me specifically? He didn't even know me. A strange look crossed Cole's face. You sure about that? Before she could ask what he meant, Pilot suddenly growled. A car door slammed in the distance. Back door, Cole whispered urgently. Now, take what you can carry. Anything that looks important. Tamsin quickly gathered the most recent water tests and the marked-up survey maps, shoving them into her coat pockets. Cole helped her pick up scattered notes, both of them working quickly but quietly. They slipped out through the pet door just as voices approached the front of the barn. Pilot led them behind a stack of old equipment, providing cover until they could make it to the tree line. Once safely away, Cole turned to her. Listen, what you found in there, it's bigger than just inheritance now. Clive's got powerful friends, and they won't take kindly to anyone threatening their plans. What should I do? Document everything, make copies, and watch your back. He paused, then added, I'll keep an eye on things best I can, but officially I never saw you here today. Tamsin nodded, understanding the delicate position he was in. Thank you, Cole. Don't thank me yet. This is just the beginning. He glanced at Pilot, who sat alertly at Tamsin's side. Take care of him. Something tells me that dog knows more than he's letting on. As they parted ways, Tamsin looked back at the barn, now visible through the bare trees. What had started as a mysterious inheritance was growing into something far more dangerous. But looking down at Pilot's trusting face, she knew she couldn't walk away. Bernard had chosen her for a reason, and she owed it to him, and to this faithful dog, to see it through. The First Wyoming Bank stood like a stone sentinel against the morning sky. Tamsin pulled her worn jacket tighter, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp air. Pilot sat obediently at her feet as she studied the brass plate on his collar one more time. The numbers were clear. Box 412. Inside, the bank manager's eyes widened at the sight of Pilot. Ma'am, we don't usually. He stays with me, Tamsin said firmly. I have documentation. She placed Bernard's death certificate and the collar on the polished desk. The manager, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, examined both items carefully. His expression shifted from skepticism to understanding. Ah yes, Mr. Rook's arrangements. Please follow me. They walked through the quiet bank, their footsteps echoing on the marble floor. Pilot's nails clicked softly behind them. The vault area smelled of metal and old paper, and the fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows on the rows of safety deposit boxes. Mr. Rook was very specific about this, the manager said, selecting a key from his ring. The box could only be accessed by the person named on that collar, and only after his death was confirmed. He paused. He spoke of you, Dr. McKay. Tamsin's heart skipped. He did. The manager nodded, but offered nothing more as he inserted his key. Your ID, please. With both keys turned, the box slid free. The manager excused himself, leaving Tamsin alone with Pilot in the small viewing room. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the lid. Inside lay a thick manila envelope, several folders of documents, and a collection of photographs secured with rubber bands. She started with the photos, spreading them carefully on the table. The images told a story that made her stomach turn. Shot after shot showed tanker trucks, their company names deliberately obscured, backing up to Rook Creek in the dead of night. The timestamps spanned months. In some photos, dark liquid poured from their tanks into the water. Bernard had documented it all, even noting locations and dates on the backs in his precise handwriting. The folders contained detailed water survey data, showing increasing levels of industrial contamination moving downstream from those dumping sites. Charts tracked the spread of pollution through the aquifer beneath the ranch. Bernard had built an airtight case against whoever was poisoning his land. At the bottom of the box lay a sealed envelope with her name written across it in strong, careful strokes. Tamsin's fingers traced the letters before breaking the seal. Pilot whined softly and pressed against her leg as she unfolded the letter. "Dear Tamsin," it began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and Pilot has done his job bringing you here. There's so much to tell you, and I'm sorry it has to be this way. I should have found you sooner." She had to pause, her vision blurring. The paper trembled in her hands. "First, you need to know the truth about who you are. Your mother, Sarah, was my daughter. We had a falling out when she was young. My fault entirely. I was too strict, too unwilling to bend. She left the ranch at 18, and I was too proud to go after her. By the time I found her again, she was gone, and you were lost to the foster system. I've regretted my stubbornness every day since." Tamsin sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. Pilot rested his head on her knee, offering silent comfort. "I hired investigators to find you," the letter continued. "Watched from afar as you put yourself through veterinary school, built your practice. I saw so much of Sarah in you, her determination, her kindness with animals, her quiet strength. I wanted to approach you, to explain everything, but by then I'd discovered something dangerous happening on the ranch." The next paragraphs detailed Bernard's investigation into the water contamination and his suspicions about Clive's involvement with the bottling company. He explained how he'd trained Pilot to recognize and trust Tamsin, planning for the worst, while hoping it wouldn't come to that. "The ranch is yours now, all legal and proper. My will is clear on this point. You are my sole heir. Clive will fight it, but the evidence in this box should help keep him in check. The land, the water rights, and most importantly, Pilot. They're all yours. He'll protect you like he protected me." Tears fell freely now as Tamsin read the final lines. "I know this is a lot to take in. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you in person. Sorry for all the years we lost. But know this, I am so proud of the woman you've become. Take care of the land, take care of Pilot, and most of all, take care of yourself. You're a rook through and through. With love, your grandfather, Bernard." Tamsin sat quietly for a long time, one hand on the letter, the other buried in Pilot's fur. Everything had changed. The mysterious inheritance that had dropped into her life wasn't just about a dog or a ranch anymore. It was about family, about belonging, about a grandfather who had watched over her from afar, trying to make things right. She carefully gathered the photos and documents, securing them in her bag. The letter she folded gently and tucked close to her heart. Looking down at Pilot, she saw him with new eyes. Not just Bernard's dog, but a living link to the family she never knew she had. "Come on, boy," she said softly. "Let's go home." His tail wagged once, and he rose smoothly to his feet. Together they walked out of the bank into the bright Wyoming morning, their shadows merging on the sidewalk. The weight of Bernard's legacy settled around her shoulders, not as a burden, but as a mantle she was meant to wear. The county courthouse loomed against the steel-gray winter sky, its red brick facade weathered by decades of Wyoming winds. Tamsin clutched her leather portfolio, containing Bernard's letter and the will, as she climbed the worn stone steps. Her boots echoed in the empty corridor as she made her way to the probate office. Inside, she found Clive already there, his expensive suit out of place among the dusty filing cabinets. He was leaning over the clerk's desk, his voice carrying that familiar note of entitlement. "This so-called will is clearly fraudulent," he was saying. "Bernard Rook was my uncle. I knew him better than anyone. He would never leave everything to some stranger." The clerk, a thin woman with steel-rimmed glasses, looked uncomfortable. Sir, the will appears properly executed, with witnesses. Witnesses can be bought, Clive cut in. He turned as Tamsin entered, his face darkening. Well, if it isn't the supposed long-lost granddaughter. Come to stake your fraudulent claim? Tamsin met his gaze steadily. The will speaks for itself, Mr. Rook, as does the DNA test I've submitted to the court. She'd had the test done immediately after reading Bernard's letter, knowing Clive would challenge her identity. The results had confirmed what her heart already knew. She was Bernard Rook's granddaughter. Papers can be forged. Tests can be faked. Clive stepped closer, lowering his voice. You have no idea what you're getting into. Walk away now, while you still can. Before Tamsin could respond, heavy footsteps approached from behind. Deputy Cole Merritt appeared in the doorway, his presence filling the small office. Everything all right in here? He asked, though his eyes were fixed on Clive. Just fine, Deputy, Clive said smoothly, stepping back. Just discussing a family matter. I'm sure. Cole turned to Tamsin. I can witness those filing papers for you, Dr. McKay, if you'd like. Grateful for his support, Tamsin nodded and began laying out the documents. As she worked with the clerk to file her formal claim to the estate, she could feel Clive's angry presence behind her, like a gathering storm. Later that afternoon, Tamsin drove out to the ranch to meet with Loretta Pike. The housekeeper had called, saying she had something important to share. Pilot sat in the passenger seat, his ears pricked forward as they approached the familiar gates. Loretta was waiting on the porch, her lined face grave. Inside, she served them coffee in Bernard's old kitchen, while Pilot paced restlessly by the door. He's been like that all week, Tamsin observed. Something's got him worried. Smart dog, Loretta said, settling into a chair. Bernard trained him to sense trouble, and there was plenty of that in the months before he died. She pulled out an old shoebox. Found these while cleaning. Think you should see them. Inside were stacks of notes, written in Bernard's hand. Security company quotes, notes about cameras and alarm systems, lists of license plate numbers, dates, and times. He was watching everything, especially after the threats started, Loretta explained. Clive and his business friends coming around at all hours, arguing about water rights, about selling the land. Bernard wouldn't budge. Pilot whined sharply, scratching at the door. Tamsin felt the hair rise on the back of her neck. Something's wrong, she said, rising. They reached the door just as the first orange glow became visible through the windows. Flames were already climbing the sides of the old barn, where Bernard had kept his evidence of the water contamination. No. Tamsin started running, Pilot streaking ahead of her. She could hear Loretta behind her, calling 911 on her cell phone. The heat hit her like a wall as she approached the barn. Smoke poured from the gaps in the weathered boards, and she could hear the crackle of burning hay. Then she heard something else, barking from inside. Pilot, no! But the dog had already disappeared through the partially open door, following his training to protect the ranch's secrets. Tamsin pulled her jacket over her face and plunged after him. The smoke was blinding, burning her eyes and throat. She could barely see the barn's interior through the haze, but she could hear Pilot barking somewhere ahead. Pilot, come, she called, coughing. The flames were spreading rapidly across the dry wooden beams overhead. She found him in Bernard's old office, pawing at a section of floorboards. Understanding hit her. There must be something hidden there. Dropping to her knees, she found the loose board and yanked it up. Inside was a waterproof case. Good boy, she gasped, grabbing it. Now out! They made their way back through the thickening smoke. A burning beam crashed behind them as they finally burst out into the cold air. Tamsin stumbled away from the inferno, clutching the case to her chest while Pilot pressed against her legs, both of them gulping clean air. Sirens wailed in the distance as Loretta ran to them. "Thank God," she said, helping Tamsin to a safe distance. "What kind of monster would do this?" But they all knew the answer. This was Clive's retaliation, a warning written in flames. Deputy Cole Merritt arrived with the fire trucks, his face grim as he took in the scene. While the firefighters worked to contain the blaze, he knelt beside Tamsin, who sat wrapped in a blanket on the tailgate of his truck. "You okay?" he asked softly, checking her for burns. She nodded, still holding the case she'd rescued. Bernard knew this might happen. He hid everything in multiple places. She patted Pilot's head. "And he made sure we'd find it all." Cole's jaw tightened as he looked at the burning barn. "This is more than just inheritance fraud now. This is arson, endangering lives. We'll get him, Tamsin." Pilot growled low in his throat, staring at the shadows beyond the emergency vehicles. For a moment, Tamsin thought she saw a figure watching from the darkness, but then it was gone, like smoke in the wind. The barn continued to burn against the night sky, but Tamsin felt a fierce determination replace her fear. Bernard had trusted her with his legacy, had prepared for this fight. With Pilot at her side, Cole at her back, and the truth protected in multiple hiding places, she would see this through. She opened the waterproof case, revealing more documented evidence of the water contamination, along with photographs and legal papers. Bernard had known the barn might be targeted. Like everything else, he'd planned ahead, making sure the truth would survive. Loretta brought them fresh coffee as they waited for the fire to die down. Bernard used to say, "The truth is like water. It finds its way out, no matter what walls you put up." Tamsin stroked Pilot's ash-streaked fur, watching the firefighters work. The barn might be gone, but Bernard's carefully laid plans were still intact. Whatever came next, she was ready to fight for what was right, for the land, for the truth, and for the grandfather who had protected her from afar for so long. The heat grew unbearable as Tamsin pushed deeper into the burning barn. Smoke rolled across, the ceiling in thick waves, and burning debris rained down around her. Through the chaos, she heard Pilot's frantic barking coming from the back where the horse stalls used to be. "Pilot!" she called out, her voice rough from the smoke. Her eyes stung as she crouched low, trying to stay beneath the worst of it. The old wooden floor creaked ominously under her feet with each step. A loud crash from ahead made her heart jump. Through the smoky haze, she saw that part of the roof had collapsed, blocking the entrance to the stalls. Pilot's barks turned to frightened whines. "I'm coming!" She pressed forward, her veterinarian's instincts overriding her fear. The heat pressed against her like a physical wall, making each breath harder than the last. Behind her, she heard Cole Merritt's voice. "Tamsin, where are you?" "Back here!" she called out, coughing. "Pilot's trapped!" Through the smoke, she saw Cole's tall figure approaching, dragging a large water tote on wheels. He'd grabbed it from the ranch's emergency supplies, and now he sprayed a path through the flames. "The whole place is going to come down," he warned, his voice tight with worry. "We need to get out." But Tamsin had reached the fallen beams blocking the stall. Pilot's frightened face peered through a small gap, his eyes reflecting the orange glow of the flames. The sight steeled her resolve. "Help me move these," she shouted to Cole. Together they grabbed the least burning section of the collapsed roof. The wood was hot enough to sear their hands through their jackets, but they heaved it aside. Pilot scrambled backward as more debris shifted. "Careful," Cole warned, as a support beam above them groaned. He sprayed more water around them, but the flames were winning the battle. Tamsin could see Pilot more clearly now. He was trapped behind a fallen stall door, which had wedged against the wall. The dog pawed at it frantically, unable to squeeze through the narrow gap. "Hold on, boy," she said, her voice hoarse. She braced herself against the hot metal of the stall and pulled with all her strength. The door didn't budge. Cole joined her, adding his strength to hers. The metal shrieked as they finally forced it wider, making just enough space for Pilot to leap through. The dog bounded into Tamsin's arms, nearly knocking her over. "Time to go!" Cole shouted, as more of the roof began to cave in behind them. He sprayed their retreat path with the last of the water as they ran for the exit. They burst out into the cold night air just as a massive section of the roof collapsed. Tamsin fell to her knees in the snow, gulping in clean air while holding Pilot close. The dog trembled against her, his fur singed and covered in soot. "Don't you ever do that to me again," she told him, checking him over for burns. Her hands were shaking, both from adrenaline and from the realization of how close they'd come to being trapped. Cole knelt beside them, his face streaked with soot. "That was too close," he said, his voice rough. He touched her shoulder gently. "You okay?" Before she could answer, Pilot began pawing at her jacket. She realized he'd been carrying something when she'd found him, a scorched tin box that had fallen when she'd grabbed him. "What did you find, boy?" she asked, taking the box. Despite the heat damage, she could still make out Bernard's initials scratched into the lid. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside, protected from the worst of the heat, she found a stack of papers and a small notebook. The top page was a letter in Bernard's careful handwriting. "Tamsin, if you're reading this, then Pilot has done his job. I spent years training him to protect not just the ranch, but the truth. There are more caches like this one, scattered where only he knows to look. Trust him. He'll show you everything you need to know, just like he showed me what was happening to our water. Take care of each other. Bernard." Tamsin looked at Pilot with new understanding. All those times he'd led her to evidence, his careful attention to certain places around the ranch. It hadn't been random. Bernard had methodically trained him to be more than just a cattle dog. He was a guardian of secrets, waiting for the right person to share them with. "Clever old man," Cole said softly, reading over her shoulder. He knew someone might try to destroy the evidence, so he made sure it couldn't all be found at once. Pilot pressed against Tamsin's side, his usual stoic demeanor returning now that they were safe. She scratched behind his ears, feeling the strong bond between them grow even stronger. This loyal dog had just risked his life to protect Bernard's legacy, and she had risked hers to save him. They were truly partners now. From the safety of Cole's truck, they watched as the fire crews continued to battle the blaze. Tamsin held the tin box in her lap, while Pilot dozed at her feet, exhausted from their ordeal. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her hands shaking as she examined Bernard's notes. "Look at this," she said to Cole, pointing to a page of dates and locations. He was tracking the tanker trucks for months, noting exactly when and where they were dumping contaminated water. Cole studied the notebook, his jaw tight. This is solid evidence. Clive must have known about these records. That's why he was so desperate to get rid of them. Tamsin thought about how close they'd come to losing it all. If Pilot hadn't been there, if he hadn't led her to the hidden tin, if they hadn't reached him in time. She pulled the dog closer, grateful for his warm, solid presence. "Bernard knew what he was doing when he left him to you," Cole said quietly. "That dog is worth more than just companionship. He's the key to uncovering everything." Tamsin nodded, watching as the last of the barn's framework collapsed in a shower of sparks. She was covered in soot, her clothes were singed, and her lungs still burned from the smoke. But she felt stronger than ever. Bernard had trusted her with his legacy, and now she understood why. Like Pilot, she wouldn't back down from protecting what was right. Back at her clinic, Tamsin sat at her desk with Bernard's scorched tin box open before her. Pilot lay at her feet, occasionally lifting his head to check on her as she spread out the contents. The acrid smell of smoke still clung to them both, but neither seemed to notice. Her hands, cleaned of soot but still trembling slightly, carefully sorted through the papers. Inside the box, beneath the initial letter and tracking records, she found another envelope. This one was marked simply, "For when you understand about Pilot." Tamsin's heart skipped a beat. She glanced down at the dog, who looked back at her with those knowing amber eyes. With careful fingers, she opened the envelope and unfolded several pages of Bernard's distinctive handwriting. "Dear Tamsin, by now you've learned that Pilot's collar wasn't a coincidence. Nothing about him was left to chance. I've known about you for years, though we never met face to face. When your mother died, I lost my chance to make things right with her. But finding you, that gave me hope. I watched from afar as you built your veterinary practice. Saw how you treated every animal with kindness, how you stood up to folks who tried to bully you into cutting corners. You reminded me so much of your mother. She had that same quiet strength. 3 years ago, when I first noticed the water going bad, I knew I needed a plan. Clive and his partners were getting bolder. I couldn't trust the authorities, too many people in their pockets, so I started training Pilot. Every day, we worked together. I taught him to recognize specific locations, to lead trusted people to hidden caches of evidence. Most importantly, I taught him to find you. Your name on his collar wasn't just identification, it was insurance. I knew if anything happened to me, he would seek you out. And he did." Tamsin had to pause, wiping away tears. Pilot rose and placed his head in her lap, offering comfort as he'd done so many times these past weeks. She stroked his scarred ear, thinking of all the hours Bernard must have spent preparing him for this role. The letter continued. "Pilot is more than just a cattle dog. He's the guardian of everything I couldn't tell you in person. Every place he's led you, every piece of evidence he's shown you. That was years of careful training. He knows where all the proof is hidden, spread out across the ranch so it couldn't be destroyed all at once. Smart Boy never forgot a single cache. But more than that, he's the bridge I hoped would connect us. I knew when you met him, you'd understand him like I did. That's why I made sure he'd be yours. Not just to help uncover the truth, but because you both deserve someone who'll stand by you no matter what. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you all this in person. Sorry I couldn't be there to see you find your way home to the ranch. But I knew Pilot would take care of you, just like he took care of me." Tamsin had to stop again, overcome with emotion. All this time she'd thought finding Pilot had been a strange twist of fate. Instead, it had been the carefully laid plan of a grandfather she'd never known, who had watched over her from afar and trusted her with his most precious possessions, his land and his dog. She looked around her small clinic office with new eyes. The life she'd built for herself, treating local farmers' livestock and helping rescue animals, had shown Bernard exactly who she was. He'd seen her character in every choice she'd made, every stand she'd taken. And he'd chosen her, not just as his heir, but as someone worthy of Pilot's unwavering loyalty. "The truth is," the letter went on, "I knew Clive would try to claim everything when I died. He's been after the water rights for years, making deals with companies that would drain the aquifer dry. I couldn't let that happen. This land, these waters, they deserve better than to be exploited and poisoned. That's why I changed my will. Not just because you're my blood, but because you understand what matters. You see the value in things beyond their price tag. The way you care for animals, the way you fight for what's right. That's what this ranch needs. Pilot knew it too. From the first day I showed him your picture, he understood his mission. He's been preparing for this moment for years, ready to help you uncover every bit of evidence I gathered. Trust him. He won't lead you wrong. I know it's a heavy burden I've placed on your shoulders. Fighting Clive and his partners won't be easy. But you're stronger than you know, Tamsin. And you're not alone. You have Pilot, and all the proof we gathered together. Take care of each other. Protect the land. And know that even though we never met, I'm proud to call you my granddaughter. With love and faith, Bernard. Tamsin set the letter down, her vision blurred with tears. Pilot whined softly and pressed closer to her side. She wrapped her arms around his sturdy frame, burying her face in his fur. All those times he'd seemed to be leading her with purpose, all those meaningful looks and careful guidance. It hadn't been just animal instinct. It had been years of patient training by a man who'd seen far ahead and planned for every contingency. She thought about Bernard, spending his final years not just gathering evidence, but preparing Pilot to be her protector and guide. How many hours had he spent teaching the dog to recognize her scent from items he'd somehow obtained? How many repetitions had it taken to ensure Pilot would know exactly what to do if Bernard died under suspicious circumstances? The depth of trust Bernard had placed in both of them was staggering. He'd believed in her before she'd ever known he existed, had watched her build her life, and seen in her someone worthy of his legacy. And he'd entrusted Pilot, his loyal companion and partner in uncovering the truth, to her care. Looking at the dog now, Tamsin saw him with new understanding. His unwavering focus, his careful attention to specific places around the ranch, the way he'd stuck to her side from the moment they met. It all made sense. Bernard had trained him to be more than just a working dog. He'd prepared him to be a bridge between past and present, a guardian of truth, and a companion for the granddaughter he'd never met, but had watched over from afar. Pilot's collar tag caught the light, her name and address still clearly visible despite the smoke damage. What she'd first taken for coincidence, then mystery, was actually the culmination of years of careful planning. Bernard had marked Pilot as hers long before she knew either of them existed, trusting that when the time came, dog and granddaughter would find each other and continue his fight together. The responsibility was enormous, but for the first time since this all began, Tamsin felt truly ready to face it. She wasn't just fighting for an inheritance now, she was fighting for the truth Bernard had sacrificed so much to uncover. Fighting for the land he'd loved enough to protect even after death. Fighting alongside the dog he'd trained to be her partner in this battle. She picked up the papers again, studying Bernard's careful notes with new determination. Each page was another piece of the puzzle he'd left for her to solve, trusting that with Pilot's help, she'd find her way to the truth. The evidence of water contamination, the tracked movements of tanker trucks, the surveys showing the damage being done to the aquifer. It was all there, preserved and protected by an old man's foresight and a dog's unwavering loyalty. The early morning sun cast long shadows across Bernard's ranch as Tamsin stood in the training field with Pilot. Her breath made small clouds in the chilly air. She held up an old work glove that she'd carefully treated with traces of the chemicals Bernard had documented in his notes. "All right, boy," she said softly, letting Pilot sniff the glove. "Show me what Bernard taught you." Pilot's nose twitched as he processed the scent. His entire body tensed with focus, years of training kicking in. Tamsin had spent the last week studying Bernard's training logs, amazed at the detailed instructions he'd left behind. Each page revealed another layer of preparation, not just for finding evidence, but for proving it in court. "Find it," she commanded, using the specific phrase Bernard had noted. Pilot moved with purpose, zigzagging across the field in a practiced pattern. His nose stayed low to the ground, but his ears remained alert. Tamsin followed, watching his body language for the subtle changes Bernard had described. When Pilot's tail shifted from a working wag to a straight, rigid position, She knew they were getting close. Near the edge of the northern pasture, Pilot stopped. He turned in a tight circle, then sat, exactly as Bernard had trained him to do when finding toxic materials. Tamsin pulled on thick gloves and began to dig carefully where Pilot indicated. 6 inches down, her shovel struck metal. "Good boy," she praised, her heart racing. She documented everything with her phone's camera, just as Cole had shown her. Location, depth, Pilot's reaction, all of it could be crucial in court. Loretta arrived with more testing supplies, her truck crunching over the frozen ground. "Found another one, did you?" she called out, climbing down with surprising agility for her age. "Third one this week," Tamsin replied. "Pilot's getting faster at locating them." Together they collected soil samples and documented the drum's position. Loretta's hands were steady as she labeled each container, her years of managing Bernard's household evident in her precise movements. "Bernard would be proud," Loretta said, watching Pilot circle the area for additional traces. "He spent 2 years training that dog to detect these chemicals. Said someday someone would need to prove what was happening here." Cole arrived as they were finishing up, his deputy's badge catching the morning light. He'd been careful to maintain professional distance while helping with the investigation, but Tamsin had noticed his subtle ways of showing support, like making sure his patrols regularly passed by the ranch during his shifts. "How many does this make total?" he asked, crouching down to examine their find. 7 drums confirmed," Tamsin answered, showing him the GPS coordinates she'd logged. "All matching the types Bernard documented in his water testing data." Cole nodded approvingly. "Good work on the documentation. Judge Matthews is thorough. She'll want everything properly recorded." They spent the next few hours processing the scene. Pilot remained focused, leading them to 2 more suspicious areas that they marked for later investigation. Tamsin marveled at how Bernard had transformed the cattle dog's natural herding instincts into such precise detection skills. "The hearing's tomorrow," Cole reminded them as they packed up. "You ready?" Tamsin straightened, feeling the weight of Bernard's trust. "As ready as I'll ever be. We've got the evidence. Now we just have to make them see it." The next morning, the county courthouse buzzed with tension. Tamsin sat straight-backed in the probate courtroom, Pilot at her feet. She'd brushed his coat until it gleamed, wanting him to look every bit the professional working dog Bernard had trained him to be. Clive and his lawyers filled the other table, all expensive suits and confident smirks. They'd filed motion after motion trying to prevent Pilot's evidence from being presented, arguing that a dog's behavior couldn't be considered reliable proof. Judge Matthews entered, her reputation for fairness preceding her. She spent the first hour reviewing Bernard's will and letters, paying special attention to his detailed notes about training Pilot. When it was time to present their evidence, Tamsin spoke clearly and confidently, just as she did when explaining difficult diagnoses to worried pet owners. She walked the judge through Bernard's documentation, the GPS coordinates of their findings, and the soil sample results. "Your Honor," Clive's lawyer interrupted, "this is all circumstantial. A dog pawing at the ground proves nothing about Mr. Rook's intentions for his estate." Judge Matthews raised her hand. "I'll remind counsel that working dogs are regularly accepted as expert witnesses in many types of cases. Continue, Dr. McKay." Tamsin presented the photos of each drum they'd found, along with Bernard's careful records of water testing dates and results. Loretta testified about Bernard's growing concerns and his methodical preparation of both documents and dog. Cole provided professional context about chain of custody and evidence collection procedures. Through it all, Pilot sat calmly, every inch the trained professional his master had shaped him to be. When Tamsin demonstrated his detection skills using sealed samples in the courthouse parking lot, His precision impressed even the skeptics. After 4 hours of testimony, Judge Matthews called a brief recess. Tamsin took Pilot outside for water and a quick walk, trying to calm her nerves. Cole found them under a courthouse oak tree. "You did good in there," he said quietly. "Stuck to the facts. Let the evidence speak for itself. That's what Matthews responds to." Tamsin nodded, grateful for his steady presence. "I just hope it's enough. Bernard put so much trust in us, in me and Pilot. I can't let him down." When court resumed, Judge Matthews removed her glasses and looked directly at both parties. "This is an unusual case," she began, "but these are unusual circumstances. Mr. Rook clearly feared for both his legacy and the environmental safety of his land. The evidence suggests these concerns were well-founded." She shuffled through her notes. "While questions remain about the full extent of the contamination, the documented proof of Mr. Rook's intentions is compelling. Combined with the DNA confirmation of Dr. McKay's relationship and the clearly established pattern of her grandfather's preparations, I find sufficient cause to grant temporary control of both ranch operations and water rights to Dr. McKay, pending full environmental investigation." Tamsin's heart soared, but she maintained her professional composure. Pilot, sensing her joy, wagged his tail once but stayed in his perfect sit. "I'll review the situation in 90 days, Judge Matthews continued. "During that time, no water rights can be sold or transferred. Dr. McKay will work with environmental authorities to complete a full assessment of potential contamination." Clive stormed out before the judge finished speaking, his lawyers hurrying after him. Tamsin remained seated until Judge Matthews left the bench, then finally allowed herself to smile. She crouched down to hug Pilot, whispering praise in his ear. "Well done, both of you," Loretta said, her eyes suspiciously bright. "Bernard knew what he was doing, picking you two to carry on his fight." Cole helped them gather their documentation. "This is just the beginning," he reminded them. "Clive won't give up easily, and there's still a lot of investigating to do." Tamsin nodded, scratching behind Pilot's ears. "We're ready. Bernard spent years preparing us for this, even if I didn't know it then. We won't let him down." Outside, the Wyoming wind whipped across the courthouse steps. Tamsin paused, looking toward the mountains where Bernard's ranch, her ranch now, waited. Pilot pressed against her leg, alert and ready as always. Together, they had taken the first real step toward protecting Bernard's legacy. There would be more challenges ahead, but for now, they had won their day in court. Dark clouds gathered over the Wyoming mountains, bringing an early dusk to the valley. Tamsin finished her evening clinic rounds, her mind on the court victory from earlier that day. Something about the heavy air made her uneasy. Pilot wasn't at his usual spot by the door. "Pilot!" she called out, moving through the clinic. No familiar click of nails on tile answered her. Her heart quickened. He never wandered far, especially in weather like this. A crack of thunder made her jump. Through the window, she saw the first heavy drops hitting the dust. As she reached for her phone to call Cole, it buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Want your dog back? Sluice Road. Come alone or he won't make it." Her hands shook as she read the message again. The old Sluice Road ran along Rook Creek, where Bernard had documented the worst contamination. It had been abandoned years ago after floods washed out several sections. Tamsin grabbed her emergency kit and truck keys. She knew it was probably Clive, knew she should call Cole, but the thought of Pilot hurt or scared made her chest tight. The rain was falling harder now, drumming against her truck's roof as she drove through the gathering dark. The Sluice Road was treacherous even in good weather. Now, with rain turning the dirt to mud, her truck slipped and slid as she navigated the narrow track. Lightning flashed, illuminating the creek below, already rising with runoff from the mountains. Through sheets of rain, she spotted a vehicle ahead. Clive's expensive SUV, parked near the old diversion gate. The massive steel structure loomed against the stormy sky, designed to control water flow between the creek and irrigation channels. "Clive!" she shouted over the storm. "Where's my dog?" A bark answered her. Pilot's voice, scared but alive. She saw him tied to a post near the gate controls, straining against the rope. Clive stepped out from behind a concrete barrier, rain plastering his expensive suit to his body. "Should have taken the deal," he called out. "Should have." "Walked away when you had the chance." "This won't change the court's decision," Tamsin said, taking a careful step forward. The ground was slick under her boots. "Let him go and we can talk about this." "Talk?" Clive laughed, but there was no humor in it. "While you destroy everything I've worked for? While you expose things that should stay buried?" Another flash of lightning, closer now. In its stark light, Tamsin saw movement on the ridge above, Cole working his way down toward them. He must have been tracking her phone. Relief flooded through her, quickly followed by fear as she realized what position he was in. "Clive," she tried again. "The storm's getting worse. Whatever you're planning, it's not worth—" The sound hit her first, a deep, grinding shriek of metal under pressure. The diversion gate was opening, not the controlled flow it was designed for, but a full release. Water exploded through the gap, brown and angry with debris. Tamsin lunged for Pilot, desperate to reach him before the flood hit. She was halfway there when the wall of water slammed into her. It swept her off her feet, throwing her against something hard, a fallen tree maybe, or part of the old road barrier. Pain blazed through her side as the current tried to drag her under. She heard Cole shout her name, saw him scrambling down the slope toward her. Then another surge caught him, sending him tumbling across the rocks. His head struck something, and he went limp. "Cole." The word was lost in the roar of water and rain. Pilot's barking turned frantic as he fought against his restraints, trying to reach them both. Tamsin managed to grab onto a protruding root, but the water kept coming. Each wave threatened to tear her loose. Through the chaos, she glimpsed Clive running for his SUV, leaving them all to drown. The flood was still rising. Cole floated face down 20 feet away, caught in an eddy of debris. Pilot's rope was fraying against the post, but he couldn't break free, and Tamsin's strength was fading, her fingers going numb on the root that was her only lifeline. Thunder crashed overhead, and the rain fell harder. In the growing darkness, Tamsin could barely see. Her world narrowed to the burn in her muscles, the icy grip of the water, and the desperate sound of Pilot's barking. She had found her family, found her place, only to lose it all in this muddy torrent. Another wave hit, and her grip slipped. Water closed over her head as the current dragged her under, tumbling her through the darkness. She fought to surface, lungs burning, but there was no up or down in the churning flood. The last thing she heard was Pilot's howl, cutting through the storm like a beacon she couldn't reach. Fighting against the current, Tamsin kicked hard toward what she hoped was the surface. Her lungs screamed for air. Just when spots began dancing in her vision, her head broke through. She gasped, coughing up muddy water as she fought to stay afloat. Pilot's barking guided her like a lighthouse through the rain. The flood had pushed her downstream, but not as far as Cole. She could see him now, still unconscious, caught against a tangle of branches. "Hold on, boy!" she shouted to Pilot. Using every ounce of strength, she swam toward the bank. Her boots found purchase on something solid, the remains of the old road. Hand over hand, she pulled herself up against the current. Pilot's rope had stretched tight in the rising water. The knot was a mess of wet cord, impossible to untie. Tamsin fumbled at her belt for the pocket knife she always carried for emergencies at the clinic. Her frozen fingers could barely grip it, but she managed to snap the blade open. "Stay still," she told Pilot, working the knife against his restraint. The rope was thick, resisting the blade. Water lapped at her knees, threatening to sweep her away again. Finally, the last strands parted. Pilot leaped free, shaking himself but staying close to her side. "Cole," she gasped. "Find Cole." Pilot understood. He bounded along the bank, keeping pace as Tamsin splashed through shallow water toward the deputy's motionless form. Together, they reached him just as another surge threatened to tear him loose from the branches. Tamsin grabbed Cole's jacket, straining to hold him. "Help me, Pilot!" The dog seized Cole's sleeve in his teeth, pulling while she pushed. Inch by inch, they dragged him onto firmer ground. Cole wasn't breathing. Tamsin rolled him onto his side, watching anxiously until water drained from his mouth. After what felt like forever, he coughed and drew a ragged breath. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "Stay down," she ordered, though he seemed in no shape to move. Blood matted his hair where he'd hit his head. Through the rain, she spotted her truck's headlights, still shining where she'd left it. If she could reach it, the emergency strobe light might attract attention. They needed help. Cole needed a hospital. "Watch him," she told Pilot. The dog planted himself beside Cole, alert and protective. Tamsin stumbled to her truck, every muscle screaming in protest. The strobe was in her emergency kit behind the seat. She grabbed it, along with her first aid supplies. When she flipped the switch, bright pulses of light cut through the storm. Back at Cole's side, she bandaged his head as best she could. The bleeding had slowed, but he was dazed and shivering. Pilot pressed against him, sharing warmth. "They're coming," she assured them both, though she had no way to know for sure. Help is coming. As her adrenaline faded, Tamsin's mind began working again. Clive would think they were dead, or at least out of commission. That gave them an advantage, but only if they used it right. She pulled out her phone, amazingly still working in its waterproof case. With numb fingers, she typed a message to the local news station. "Anonymous tip. Surveillance cameras along Rook Creek damaged in storm. System offline until further notice." It was bait, and Clive would know it the moment he saw it. But his fear of exposure would drive him to act anyway. He'd have to check his dumping sites, destroy any evidence the flood might have uncovered. And this time, they'd be ready. Thunder rolled overhead, but the rain was finally letting up. In the distance, Tamsin heard sirens approaching. She held Cole's hand while Pilot stood guard, all three of them waiting for rescue, and for their chance to end this fight once and for all. 3 nights after the flood, Pilot's ears pricked up in the darkness. The cattle dog stood rigid beside Tamsin's truck, his nose testing the wind. They'd been waiting in the shadows near Rook Creek, watching for movement. "What is it, boy?" Tamsin whispered. The moon slipped behind clouds, leaving only starlight to see by. Pilot's tail went stiff, his warning signal. Then came the distant rumble of engines. Through her night vision binoculars, Tamsin spotted 2 pickup trucks creeping along the service road, their headlights off. Metal drums gleamed in their beds. She pressed the button on her radio twice, their agreed signal to Cole and Loretta, waiting at different points along the creek. Pilot whined softly, eager to move. "Not yet," Tamsin breathed. They had to wait until the trucks stopped, until they caught Clive red-handed. The vehicles pulled up near the water's edge. Men began unloading barrels, working quickly and quietly. Tamsin recognized Clive's bulky shape directing them. Her hands tightened on Pilot's collar. Suddenly, one of the drums slipped, clanging against rocks. The sound echoed through the valley. The workers froze. In that moment of tension, Pilot barked, sharp and loud. "Who's there?" Clive's voice carried across the dark. Flashlight beams stabbed through the night. "Now." Tamsin clicked on her own powerful light, catching Clive and his men in its glare. "Game's over, Clive." He squinted against the brightness, then his face twisted with rage. "You!" He lunged for his truck's cab. The engine roared to life. Tires spun as he yanked the wheel around, aiming straight for where Tamsin and Pilot stood. But she was ready. As the truck bore down on them, she yanked hard on a rope they'd hidden earlier, a mooring line strung low across the path. The cable caught Clive's front tire, redirecting it straight into the soft mud of the riverbank. The truck's momentum carried it forward until it sank deep, engine whining uselessly. Cole appeared from his hiding spot, gun drawn. "Out of the vehicle! Hands where I can see them!" Clive kicked his door open, stumbling in the mud. "You think you've won something? You're nothing. This was my ranch, my birthright." "Keep talking," Loretta's voice rang out. She stepped into view, holding up her phone. "The recorder's getting every word." Cole reached Clive, forcing his hands behind his back. The handcuffs clicked shut as Clive continued his tirade. "Bernard was a fool. He had no right to give it all to some stray mutt and a nobody vet. I did what needed doing, what he was too weak to do." Tamsin scratched Pilot's ears as they watched Cole read Clive his rights. The dog's tail wagged once, satisfied. They'd done it, together, just as Bernard had planned. The other men surrendered quietly as police cars arrived, their red and blue lights painting the creek in shifting colors. Evidence teams would handle the barrels now. Justice, like water, would find its way. The county courthouse buzzed with tension 2 weeks after Clive's arrest. Tamsin sat in the witness box, her voice clear and steady, as she detailed the trail of evidence Bernard had left through Pilot. The dog lay quietly at her feet, a special allowance from the judge given his role in the case. "And these documents," the prosecutor held up the water testing results, "were preserved by Mr. Bernard Rook before his death?" "Yes," Tamsin answered. "He stored them in multiple locations, knowing they might be destroyed. The most crucial evidence was kept in a safety deposit box, the number engraved on Pilot's collar." From the defendant's table, Clive glared at her, but his former confidence had crumbled. His expensive suit looked rumpled, and dark circles ringed his eyes. One by one, his business partners had abandoned him, their lawyers scrambling to make deals with the district attorney. The evidence was overwhelming. Bernard's meticulous records of illegal dumping, backed by soil samples and water tests, surveillance footage of the tanker trucks, Loretta's recording of Clive's confession by the creek. The prosecutor laid it out piece by piece, building an airtight case of environmental crimes spanning years. When they played the recording of Clive admitting to sabotaging the floodgates, several jurors gasped. The attempted murder charge hit especially hard, with Cole's testimony about finding Tamsin and Pilot nearly drowned in the surging water. The defendant didn't just poison the land, the prosecutor concluded. He tried to silence those who would expose him, including his own uncle. But thanks to Bernard Rook's foresight and the loyalty of a remarkable dog, the truth couldn't be buried. The grand jury took less than 2 hours to return their indictments. Clive would face multiple felony counts, his corporate allies now scattered like leaves in a storm. After the grand jury's decision, the probate judge made his final ruling on Bernard's will. The courtroom was quiet as he spoke, his voice firm and clear. "Having reviewed all evidence and testimony, I hereby validate the last will and testament of Bernard Rook. The ranch, water rights, and all associated properties are awarded to his granddaughter, Dr. Tamsin McKay." Later that afternoon, Tamsin walked the ranch's eastern pasture, Pilot trotting faithfully by her side. The spring grass was starting to green, pushing through the last patches of snow. She knelt at Bernard's grave marker, tucking his letter into a waterproof container before nestling it among the fresh flowers. "You did right by the land," she whispered. "I'll do the same." Back at the ranch house, Loretta Pike waited on the porch, her weathered face brightening with the first real smile anyone had seen in weeks. She had already started dinner, the smell of fresh bread wafting through the screen door. Deputy Cole Merritt leaned against his truck, still favoring his injured leg. When Tamsin approached, he straightened up. "You're not in this alone," he said simply. "I'm not going anywhere." Pilot barked once, as if sealing the promise, and pressed closer to Tamsin's side. In the quiet of the ranch house kitchen, Tamsin held the small brass tag in her steady hands. The engraving tool hummed softly as she carefully carved each letter. Pilot, home. The metal caught the evening light streaming through the window, making the fresh etching shine. Pilot lay curled at her feet, his breathing deep and content. Gone were the heart-wrenching howls that had echoed across the property when Bernard died. Now, as Tamsin finished the tag and attached it to his worn leather collar, the dog lifted his head to rest it in her lap. His amber eyes, once clouded with grief, now held peace. Cole's boots scuffed against the wooden floor as he brought them both steaming cups of coffee. His hand brushed her shoulder, gentle and reassuring. Through the window she could see the ranch stretching out before them, the green pastures, the clear creek, the sturdy barn rebuilt after the fire. This was her inheritance, yes, but more than that, it was her home. Tamsin scratched behind Pilot's scarred ear, feeling the rightness of everything settling into place. Bernard had given her more than just land and water rights. He'd given her roots, purpose, and a chance at love. As the sun set over the Wyoming hills, she knew she was exactly where she belonged. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.